7:04, I, Helen Ingle, call the May 8th, 2018 Board of Aldermen meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I will now call roll call. Alderman Greedy.
Here.
Alderman Duncan.
Here.
Alderman Stafford.
Here.
Alderman Charbonneau.
Here.
Alderman Maybe.
Here.
Alderman Miguel.
Here.
Alderman Ivas.
Here.
Alderman Kenny.
He is absent but excused, and let the record show that Mayor Roby is also absent and excused.
At this time, in accordance with the rules of order, it is appropriate for the board to put forth a chairman pro tem. Are there any nominations to serve as chairman pro tem this evening?
Ms. Ingle, I'll nominate Alderman Charbonneau to serve as our presiding officer for the evening.
Second.
Motion by Alderman Maybe and seconded by Alderman Duncan.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Moving on, I see Alderman Maybe with your light on, sir.
Yes, given the, if you'll indulge me for a moment, can I say a quick show of hands? Who is here for the Playhouse Productions matter on the agenda? All right, given that, I would move that we amend the agenda and the item of new business concerning the ordinances dealing with the Playhouse Productions contract. If we could move that to the second item on the agenda following the proclamation honoring Crestview Senior Living. And in conjunction with that motion, I would also ask that we have a dedicated public comment session for this topic, since it's falling before public comment on the agenda, and that speakers be given 2 minutes to comment on the matter.
I'll second that.
All right, we have a motion and a second. Do I see any discussion? No discussion needed. Seeing all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The ayes carry it. We will move the new business after the proclamation honoring Crestwood Senior Living. So moving on, seeing no further business with that, we will move to the proclamation honoring Crestview Senior Living 5th anniversary.
Chairman Charbonneau, would you like me to read the proclamation?
Would you please read the proclamation?
Unfortunately, no one could be with us tonight, but the mayor does intend to present this to Crestview Senior Living Center at an upcoming event and party that we're having to celebrate. Proclamation number 1801. Whereas Crestview Senior Living was founded in May 2008 with a mission to create communities that feel like home, where residents thrive and relationships grow. And whereas they provide a pet-friendly, independent living community with more than 125 residents, enjoying luxurious services and amenities. And whereas, according to SeniorAdvisor.com, Crestview was named a 2018 Best of Senior Living Award as rated by families. And whereas Crestview Senior Living is celebrating their 10th anniversary on May 26, 2018, the City of Crestwood would like to thank Crestview's friendly and professional staff on providing first-rate quality care to some of Crestwood's finest residents. Now, therefore, I, Glenn Roby, Mayor of the City of Crestwood, and the Board of Aldermen, do hereby express our congratulations to Crestview Senior Living on their 10th anniversary and extend our sincerest best wishes for continued success and passion for care in the years to come. Proclaim this 8th anniversary 2018.
Thank you. I'll take a vote on that to approve the proclamation.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Hearing none. All right, proclamation approved. Moving on, as we discussed, we're moving the Playhouse production item from new business to the next item on the agenda. And then, do we have any, let's first take public discussion on this before we address the item. I do keep in mind that, as Alderman Beatty pointed out in his motion, keep public comment for 2 minutes. If you do agree with a speaker, I may ask that you just raise your hand so we don't get a continuous recurrence of the same speak matters. So anyone on this side of the room care to go first? Ma'am in the back, please come forward. Please state your name and address for the record.
Roseanne Shannon, 55 Heather. I just want to say just a few things in reference to this, okay, the playhouse. When I came to the city of Crestwood in 2006, I really knew nothing about Crestwood. And then a lady that I'd been talking to for about 4 months, driving her nuts to get this job, took me around and kind of showed me things. And I still, to this day, I call her my friend. That following summer, she was in the play. And you would think the roof of the city hall was going to explode because Helen was in the play, which is awesome. And also her whole family was in the play. But anyway, the Playhouse to me was something that I only saw when I went to the Muni. So to see something special and so family orientated just moved me beyond. Since then, I don't think I've missed very few productions at all that they've had. It's the funnest time for $5 anywhere you can go in Crestwood. You take your lawn chair. If you want to take a glass of wine, go ahead, not me. But it's phenomenal. And whatever you decide to do tonight for their stage, I hope it's, favorable for them. Because Lord knows without that, I don't know what we're going to do. Helen's going to be singing all day here. But anyway, and to the people that are here, I appreciate this turnout because it just makes you, you can understand, guys and gals. Please. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Helen may not be singing while she's at work, but we definitely sing her praises. Any other comments from this side? Ma'am in the back.
Good with kids.
Yeah, would you like to? My name is Melissa Balmerino, 9835 Knollshire Drive. I just wanted to say we came here with our 2 kids. I started doing Playhouse when I was 14. When I was 16, I met my friend, Billy Balmerino. We were friends for a really long time doing shows together. We got married 4 years ago. We have 2 boys. We've been a part of Playhouse. Al and Sandy have been there for the birth of our children and our wedding. And we took pictures on this stage the day of our wedding. It's very important to us. I mean, we're so thankful to have him in Crestwood. He's on Facebook. I think there have been at least 4 marriages through the program, probably more. But we're just so happy to have him here. We hope you support him.
Any other comments from this side of the room? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to this side. Any comments from this side? No, come on. Yes, sir. Yeah, of course.
Hi.
Please state your name and address for the record.
Sure. So my name is Ed Reggie. My address is 500 North 13th Street, and that's downtown St. Louis, Missouri. So my name is Ed Reggie. I actually have an interesting, peculiar connection to the White Cliff Playhouse in that sense that White Cliff, in that the White House. What I just said, White House. White Cliff. Sorry, I just ran here. And so I was a park ranger here back in the day after I did my undergraduate work. for a short time, and in that time, I got to really see the amazing work as a park ranger here for the city of Crestwood, the work that they were doing, and it got me kind of connected to it, and I sort of got back into theater myself, and I now travel and do theater professionally all around the United States and outside the United States, and I cannot say how much the impact that I've seen in the kids, the parents, and the audiences that come see those shows, and I still to this day meet now amazing, no longer children, adults, as I travel the United States who have been connected and impacted by the work they have done on that, oddly enough, that parking lot. So I just want to run here and make sure I could say that it's just amazing, the work that Al and Sandy do. So.
All right. Thank you so very much. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Lynn Richard, and my address is 6001 Victory Lane. I live in High Ridge, Missouri, so I'm from Jefferson County. And my point is, I worked with Al and Sandy for 25 years. I had piano students of mine involved in this. It's a wonderful family production. We have seen kids go on and do professional theater, and they all got it from a taste here from Playhouse Productions. So it's just not here in Crestwood, but this reaches out throughout St. Louis and out of the county. So I just really hope that you support this wonderful production that they do, because they've put a lot of heart and soul into it, more than anybody would know. So I hope you find it favorable.
Thank you very much. Any other comments from the side? Yes, ma'am. Please state your name and address for the record.
Madeline Portwood, 401 Thoreau Trail in High Ridge. I started doing theater with Al and Sandy when I was 8 years old. Back last year, I had a car accident and landed in a coma for 9 days. My first question whenever I woke up, other than where's my son, is does Al and Sandy know? Do Al and Sandy know? My mom's like, well, they didn't birth you, but yeah, they know. Well, they might as well have. They have become more family to me than most of the people I know. I met my boyfriend through them. I've grown up with them. They've watched me go from a kid of just 8 years old to now I'm 23, almost.
Thank you.
And they've just been a big part of helping me find myself through theater. I'm now signed with a talent agency, but it all started from Al and Sandy.
Thank you. Any other comments from the side of the room? Yes, ma'am. Please state your name and address for the record.
I'm Mary Spencer. My address is 9521 Parkfield Place Drive, so I could walk here from my house. And so I just want to state that the program they do with the kids and the teenagers, and really teaching them responsibility and hard work, and it's not about just themselves, it's about the whole group. They really learn a lot of values. My son learned a lot of values. Plus, he could ride his bike there every day, and it was something to do during the summer, and it's a real value and asset also for the citizens of Crestwood. Thank you.
Any other comment from the side? Yes, sir.
Address is 4118 Federer, St. Louis City. Obviously, I represent Playhouse Productions. I just want to take the opportunity, first of all, thank you guys. 28 years, hopefully, for a couple more, we've been doing shows in the park. I think one of the things I appreciate the most, and it's so hard to put in writing, is the effect that those shows have on the community. We looked at numbers just this afternoon, just out of curiosity. We're talking about 2,600 people into Crestwood. through the course of the season, people that wouldn't be here otherwise. To me, that has an impact on the community. I know for a fact, don't contradict me, people, that before and after the show, they're having a drink, they're having dinner, they're celebrating in Crestwood. I think what we've got going on in Crestwood that we'd like to continue is a strong tradition. It's family-oriented. It's in the park, which is a great setting. I think we've continued it for many years. Thank you, Jesse, for the consideration, and thank these guys for their support. If there's any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Any other comments from the side of the room? Yes.
As much as I hate to follow out. My name is Benjamin Antone. I live at 441 Forder. I have been doing Playhouse for over 25 years straight. And I've done a lot of backstage work, a lot of tech work, lighting, sound, set building and stuff. Other than the fact that the entertainment value that Playhouse brings to Crestwood, the people involved directly in the shows, I believe it helps build responsibility for the kids. It helps the kids. The entire Playhouse community, it brings everybody together from such diverse groups and makes them work together. And I just think that it just in general helps the community as a whole. And I think it's really, really important. So
thank you. Side of the room. Seeing none, we'll close public comment section on this. City Administrator, did you want to give a brief overview for everyone about this ordinance?
Sure.
Before us?
The ordinance before the board is an agreement between the city and Playhouse Productions. And obviously this is, I don't know how many number in a long line of agreements that we've had with this organization. There are a couple changes to note, and you can follow along in the package. I refer to Mr. Gillum's memorandum, but I'll reiterate those here. We have a 4-year term on the agreement. There is a change in the arrangement with the selection of the productions, where the city will approve productions, obtain the rights to those productions, and then be reimbursed by Playhouse for the costs of those rights and royalties. Playhouse Productions will be responsible for the initial design and construction of the stage, whereas the city will be responsible for the material costs of the stage, tear down, and future assembly. The stage is something I think of a special note for the city. The former stage had been intended to be a temporary stage in the early 2000s. I don't think anybody expected that it would be used for the next 15 plus years, and it certainly was at the end of its life from a safety perspective. So we do have these plans for a new stage to be constructed, replacing the old one. That stage will be designed by a professional architect and have to receive all of the necessary approvals from St. Louis County, and that should hopefully be a good venue for them in the coming years. The estimated material cost there is not to exceed $10,000 on that stage, and it is worth noting that the ordinance before the board also contains a budget amendment of $10,000 to account for the additional unplanned expense of this stage construction. That's a $10,000 amendment to the Parks and Stormwater Fund budget.
Thank you. All right. Alderman Green, you had your light on?
Accident, sorry. I did. I was going to say I heard feedback from quite a few residents via email, a couple telephone calls, and it was all positive feedback and urging me to move forward with this. And I've reviewed the contract, and it's a fair balancing of responsibilities, and it's an exciting program, and look forward to approving it and having another 4 years of plays in the park.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Satter.
Thank you.
actually ditto what Alderman Mabee has said. I talked to several residents in Ward 2 around my block, standing out in the street. Many people have gone to many of the productions. We think it's a real asset to the community, and I'm definitely in support of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Alderman Iwas.
I just want to say the same thing. I think it's a great program. I'm very supportive of that. It's taxpayer money well used, and we just need to go with that program again.
Thank you, Alderman Iwas. Alderman Miguel.
Thank you. I was just wondering if Mr. Booker, someone could tell me a little bit more about Playhouse Productions. Is it a not-for-profit organization? Do they have volunteers, employees?
There are no employees. Playhouse Productions is a 501c3 non-for-profit educational theater program. There are no employees.
And where do your volunteers come from?
Mr. Burke, do you mind coming out to the microphone? I'm sorry. No, you're completely fine.
Can you tell us about your volunteers, where they all come from?
In the actual shows themselves, we will announce the auditions, and there will be approximately 200 people who are going to audition. The youngest being right around 4.5, and the oldest won't admit to any age. So I take it that they're older than I am. Careful. We're pretty much hitting all of the metropolitan area in terms of the actual people involved in the productions, either tech or performing. Now, in terms of audience, I can't tell you where all they come from. I know we've spoken to people over the years who are coming in for every show from Alton, they're coming in from Belleville, they're coming in from South County, they're coming in from Forest, and so I mean, we're really drawing from around the area. We really have never had the resources or the time to track where the audience is coming from. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is that all you had, Alderman Miguel?
Yes, that's all I had.
All right. Thank you, Alderman. Seeing no further lights, at this time I'm going to ask for a motion for a first reading.
Second.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed?
And you'll find it there in the green as well to pass.
Say, I'm sorry, Colin.
It's the third one in the stack.
All right. Bill number, please.
1801.
Please pass this down to Alderman Mabee.
Bill number 1801, introduced by Alderman Mabee. An ordinance approving an agreement with Playhouse Productions Incorporated, amending ordinance number 4819, the Park and Stormwater Fund budget, and authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute the same on behalf of the city.
Alderman Mabee?
Yes.
Alderman Breeding?
Yes.
Alderman Charbonneau?
Yes.
Alderman Miguel?
Yes.
Alderman Duncan?
Yes.
Alderman Ayubas?
Yes.
Alderman Statter?
Yes.
7 ayes, the motion is passed.
Alderman Breeding with the motion, Alderman Duncan with the second. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes carried. Mr. Miguel, would you please do the second reading? Thank you.
Bill number 18-01, introduced by Alderman Mabee. An ordinance approving an agreement with Playhouse Productions Inc., amending ordinance number 4819, the Park and Stormwater Fund budget, and authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute same on behalf of the city.
Alderman Breeding?
Yes.
Alderman Statter?
Yes.
Alderman Mabee?
Yes.
Alderman Ayubas?
Yes.
Alderman Duncan?
Yes.
Alderman Charbonneau?
Yes.
Alderman Miguel?
Yes.
7 ayes, the motion has passed.
Thank you very much. On to the next item on the agenda, we have the fiscal year 2017 audit presentation from Michelle Char.
They got a whole bunch
Good evening. My name is Mark Graves. I'm a partner at Commercial Lauren Company. We are your independent auditors. Thank you again for this opportunity to perform the audit. This is our fourth year in a row doing it. We'd like to thank Don and Chris, as well as Jen and Pam for their assistance throughout the audit process. While I could probably spend quite a while looking at the audit in an effort to move it along, I'll use 10 or 15 minutes, leave as much time as you all need for questions, but I'm going to go through it pretty quickly. Our profession does require us to kind of set the ground rules of the audit process, and the familiar faces get to hear the same thing you probably heard the last 3 years, more or less. But our responsibility as the auditors is to express an opinion that the financial statements are in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles, which they are. Management, you all are responsible for the financial statements themselves. That includes the selection and use of accounting policies. The policies in place for the city are appropriate for a municipality of your size. The use of accounting estimates, estimates like the useful lives of capital assets, collectability of receivables. Estimates don't always come out as you would expect them to be, which is why we have to communicate that to you. But the estimates that are in place are appropriate and reasonable at the end of the year. We have obtained an understanding of the internal control that's in place, really to determine how much testing we need to perform. The audit, we don't do a special audit of internal control. Our responsibility is to obtain reasonable assurance, not absolute assurance. We don't look at every transaction that took place throughout the year. But based on that understanding, the controls in place appear to be appropriate. They appear to be operating as we would expect them to be operating with the controls that are there and as we would expect them to. So the primary adjustments we had during the year were related to government-wide statements, which is to say really recording of fixed assets, recording of pension adjustments, things that are kind of unique to the year-end accounting process. They don't really affect the individual funds that you all look at on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis, and they really don't indicate any issue with the financial reporting that the city has. There were no disagreements with management. Chris or Don didn't say, boy, we really need you to report something in a certain way, so we had no issues like that. Our firm did assist with the preparation of these financial statements, which is a standard practice. But they have been reviewed by Don and Chris, and we've gone through any issues they had. So with that, I would like to move to the financial statements. I presume everybody has a copy of those. Now this does cover December 31st, 2017. I know you all look at financials on a pretty consistent monthly and quarterly basis. So like I said before, I'm going to go really quickly, just hit the highlights, but if there are certain items that you wanted to address, you can do it in the middle. You can wait till the end, whatever is most convenient. So the city does report in accordance with Governmental Accounting Standard Board pronouncements. And one of the things that requires is the management discussion and analysis that comes right after our report. Now, the MD&A, as it's abbreviated, provides kind of an overall review of the city's financial activities. It provides some narrative explanation of fluctuations between 2017 and 2016. It also includes some budgetary information, some forward-looking information towards 2018, and it really kind of provides a synopsis of the city's results. And I think it does a relatively good job of doing that kind of in layman's terms, as opposed to getting bogged down with 17 pages of just piles of numbers. So that is in there for the readers of the financial statements. Now, once we get past that, there's kind of two sets of financial statements. We're going to look at the net position and the statement of activities, and these basically provide 100% of the activity of the city. I'll kind of get to what that means in a second. Following those statements, though, are the balance sheet, the statement of revenues, expenditures, and fund balances of the governmental funds. And the primary difference between kind of that first set and the second set is these kind of focus on near-term inflows and outflows, which is to say it's almost kind of like a cash basis financial statement, and it's looking at what funds are going out and coming in the near term, if you will. Items such as capital purchases are expensed as they're incurred. Again, in the government-wide, in the statements we're going to look at, those are all capitalized. They're prepared really in line with the funds that you guys look at, the general fund, capital improvement, park and storm water, and sewer laterals. So that's what that second set that I'm not going to spend much time at all on are really comprised of. And then there's kind of a reconciliation between those two sets of statements to bridge the government-wide to the fund basis statements. So independent auditors report a couple pages in on page 1 and 2. Following the table of contents is an unmodified or clean opinion. It does indeed identify that the financial statements are in conformity with generally accepted accounting principles and that there were no misstatements. Now, if you're going to, I'm going to have you turn all the way past that management discussion and analysis and get to page 13. And like I said, if we need to backtrack, I'm happy to do that. On page 13, what you will get to is the second last number on that page, which is total assets of $33.9 million at the end of the year. About 2/3 of the way down, you'll see an item called net pension asset, $4,332,000. And I point that out because that's an asset basically held by the Missouri loggers, basically on behalf of the city for your employees, past and present. And it's recorded on these government-wide statements, and it's not in your fund statements. And the key here is that this is not really an asset of the city for your operations. It does also identify the fact that we have an asset, that the assets in that plan are in excess of the liabilities. And there's really quite a few municipalities and governmental entities that are on the other side of that, which is to say they have not put enough into the system over the years and are in a negative position. Fortunately, you all are not in that position. There's also 5 pages of footnotes that talk about how we get to that number. I'm certainly not going to dwell on that, but if there is anybody who's an actuary, I don't know if there is anybody, but you probably appreciate that a little more than I do. So if we kind of put that to the side, normal assets, if you will, without those pension assets, are up about $5 million. The increases in cash and investments of about 1.7. The biggest chunk of that increase is sitting in the capital improvement fund. Some of that has been received and is earmarked for the construction of the Public Works building. We have an increase in receivables of $450,000. That's reflected in that $888,000 property tax receivable, and that is a result of the 45-cent increase that was approved in April. And then finally, capital assets were up about $2.8 million. Biggest chunk of that is construction that's in process for the Public Works building, as well as your replacement HVAC unit or system, a bunch of slab replacement, and then really in the MD&A there's a kind of a laundry list of those capital items, which really are, it's a good place for it. The public kind of likes to see that, so spelling all of that information out for them is probably worthwhile. Now the next page, that doesn't have a page on the bottom, I can't remember if we gave you fold-out pages in the big book there, but the next side of that page are our liabilities. Total liabilities of $2 million at the end of the year are up about $700,000, and really all of that can be directed right towards the Public Works building. So that building is in process at the end of December. There were expenses that were incurred at that point, haven't been paid yet, were paid subsequent to year end, so that reflects that large increase at the end of the year. I can tell you in the work that we did, it's clear the city pays their bills on a timely basis. It's all happening in the normal course as we would expect it to happen. So the fact that that's a big number at the end of this year has nothing to do with accounting not happening as it should be in the finance office. Now the city's financial position, I would suggest, really is very stable. If you get down to the bottom there, the $33 million, if we took out the pension items, you'd have $27.5 million of net position. If you look at for-profit financial statements, you could call it retained earnings, if you wanted to look at it that way. But that $27.5 million is an increase of about $4.2 million. A big part of that increase is the $2.8 million increase in capital assets. So of all of that unrestricted, of those unrestricted items, $18.8 million of that is the buildings, the pools, the vehicles, all of the fixed assets that you have. About $3.9 million of it are those amounts that are restricted for specific items in the various funds, and then left over is about $4.8 million of unrestricted balance. The difference being the 10.285 that's sitting there. If we backed out all those, if you will, odd pension-related items, what you have left that's unrestricted, that's available for the city, is roughly $4.8 million of unrestricted assets. A lot of talking, but I'm just going to keep on going. The next page, page 14, statement of activities, basically our income statement. I will point out the first row of items that you see are the expenses, and really that's why governmental statements are positioned this way, because it kind of drives home your responsibility to citizens for the expenditures of the city. What I can tell you, that $11.8 million is up about $850,000. The biggest chunk of that is related to the city's pay plan that was implemented fully in 2017. And if we looked at the various sections, if you will, the general government was up about $130,000, public works was up about $150, police was up $180, fire department up $312, and parks and recs were up $85. Point of all of that is clearly just every area is up, and we would expect that when the biggest reason for those increases are the salaries that were increased during the year, obviously across the board. Total general revenues of $13.7 million are up $4.7 million from last year. Tax revenues were up $1.3 million again. The biggest chunk of that is reflected in that 45-cent property tax increase. And the miscellaneous number is obviously a very big number. Of that $3.7 million, 3.4 of that is reflected. It reflects the monies received from MSD in the agreement to build the Public Works facility. And everybody here probably understands how that worked, but really the agreement with them was they would pay the money to the city would construct the building, and that's kind of how that money is traveling. So that's where that's reflected in the current year as funds received from the Missouri Department, or the Metropolitan Sewer District. I'm going to keep moving. One item I'm going to point out on the next page, page 15, and then we're going to skip forward pretty quick. At the bottom of page 15 is the general fund. Back in 2015, you all passed a resolution that said we are going to maintain unrestricted reserves in our general fund that are 45% or more of annual expenditures. So if you look at that number, total fund balance of $5.3 million, and you take that number and divide it by the amount, I'm going to make it flip a little bit, but the amount on page 17, total expenditures of $8,086,000, we get to a reserve of 66%. Last year the number was 56 or 58%. So again, it's reflected. We saw those numbers increasing this year. So again, a policy that you have in place, there's also a separate footnote that identifies that you are requiring of yourselves to keep a reserve in place for the future. And those pages 15 to 18 are those other statements that we talked about. So if you flip through there, you will see the funds that you all look at consistently, and those reconciliation pages that obviously have a lot of information on them, but kind of bridge the gap between those two sets of statements. After that, we start on page 19, and we get about 9 pages worth of accounting policies. There really aren't any policies I was going to point out to you specifically. So if something did jump out at somebody, again, we can backtrack to it. Again, these are the policies that are in place. You all are following. I would suggest to you, if you picked up the city of Sunset Hills, the city of Kirkwood, you could almost go down the line and you'd find that the policies in place are really consistent with neighboring municipalities. After that, starting on page 28, we get footnotes that really break down in a lot more detail all of the numbers we just talked about. So when we look at capital assets of $18.8 million, you get a spreadsheet basically in the footnotes that will break that out in total, so those numbers can be identified if someone wants to look at those details. All the way back to page 40, we do have a footnote that's called commitments and contingencies. In that footnote, we spell out kind of the status of the Crestwood Mall site. Again, it's kind of stagnant, I don't think is the right word, but it's there and we're kind of waiting on the developer, and that's simply what the update to this footnote says. We also talk about the agreement that's in place with MSD, and again, that's just for the reader of those financials to understand that that is going on out there. Following those pages, pages 43 to 50, our budget to actual for each of the individual funds. A lot of budget to actual information was kind of addressed in the management discussion and analysis as well. We wanted to look at some of that fluctuation, but I will tell you, really you go down the line, while there's always going to be fluctuations, there's really only 2 big ones. Y'all didn't budget for the increased property tax, if I'm remembering correctly. So we see an increase in actual property tax revenue over budgeted. And then the amount that was budgeted to be received in the miscellaneous area from MSD was less than what was received. And that's really the 2 big items that jump out at you when you look at those budget to actual numbers. So I've gone through that stuff pretty quickly. I'm happy to address any other items if there are any questions. If something comes up in the future that you have questions, you should certainly always feel free to contact Don or Chris and let them know if you need any clarification. We'd be happy to help with that. But again, if there's any questions, I'd be happy to field those.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jones. Opening it up for questions, Alderman Maybe.
Just briefly, when you were going through some of the increases early on, you indicated a lot of it was salary and pay plan driven, and you went through the departments and you said that the fire department had an increase that was in excess of $300,000. I assume that also included the large increase in our payment to the Afton Fire Protection District?
I believe that's accurate.
Okay. And then you mentioned early on that this was a clean audit and that our controls were adequate, nothing alarming there. You do work for some other cities and entities. When compared to those, our peers, I suppose, or our financial controls, would you say they're average, above average, or below average?
They're certainly not below average, and I would certainly say they're probably above average in that, and even this year, I mean, it's always when you transition, and Don started what, beginning of November, end of November, so you walked in at the right at the end of the fiscal year. The nice thing about that is the processes that are in place are already in place. And so what we found was certainly just in the small amount of time that Don was here, picked up where Rick left off, and those approvals seem to be happening as they should work. I certainly can't give you an average, so I would say it is close, it's above average. I'm not going to put grades on things, so but I would say compared to other entities, it's probably above the line of what we tend to see by and large.
And nothing through your work with the city, nothing you saw from a board level that we would need to amend or change from a policy perspective. You were satisfied with the level of cooperation you got and all of that?
We absolutely were.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Alderman Maybe. Alderman McGill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On page 15, good to see you again, Mark.
You too, Alderman O'Gall.
And perhaps these questions are for the administration more than you, but I'm not sure who would be the more better person to address the questions. On page 15, where you list the various funds, the Sappington House is listed as having a balance of $84,000. On page 17, we see that the Sappington House receipt has revenue of $44,000 and expenditures of $34,000. What is the city's relationship with the Sappington House at this time?
I have to check my memory in what those funds are that are coming into the Sappington House. If you remember, way back when, there were actually additional funds related to Sappington House that I believe have been separated. And as opposed to trying to search my memory banks for why it is that we have this reported here, I would prefer to double check that and the notes. As you can imagine, at $83,000 of cash on the books, we audit that activity to the extent that we know that cash is there. From a level of materiality, our efforts are directed in the other directions where there are higher risk areas, collectability, things of that nature. But I'd have to go double check what all flows into Sappington House.
Mr. Simpson, would you care to add anything to that?
I'd hate to expound on it because I haven't really had a chance to delve deeply and familiarize myself with the details of it. But perhaps it's a topic for a discussion at a future meeting. I know that we're working on some potential changes with regards to our relationship, so we might have a nice thorough examination and exploration of that topic in the coming months.
Very good. Okay, let's see. Let me again go back to page 13. On the right-hand side, there's $297,000 in accrued salaries. Is the city adhering to its policy of vacation carryover?
It is my recollection that they are. I would like to think that if they were not, we were paying attention to that. I will also admit to you that I have a mental note after one of the large, prominent local not-for-profits had an issue with abuse of PTO time. My recollection is that you guys were on, that was operating like it was supposed to. I don't know the policy off the top of my head, but my recollection is that it's running how it's supposed to.
Okay.
Now, I can add some context to that,
Alderman.
Sure. We do have the policy in place, but I believe it's our civil service rules do also provide a mechanism by which employees can request to be allowed to be in excess of that at year end, and I do receive a decent number of memoranda of requests asking to be allowed to carry a balance that's in excess of the policy, and I try to retain those and make sure that they do draw that balance down in the coming year, as their letter generally indicates. They say, oh, I'll take some vacation soon and get it down.
Very good. That's what I wanted to hear. Thank you. On page, excuse me, I've been losing my voice for a while. Page 37, other post-employment benefits. As I understand, note F there, halfway down the page, our net post-employment benefits amount to $559,000. Is that a correct understanding of that number?
That is correct.
Okay. If I turn to page 50, and I'm not trying to trick you up, I'm just trying to understand the numbers. The unfunded accrued liability is $852,000. I guess I was expecting those numbers to be the same. What is it that I'm missing?
Well, I would have to rethink where we're at. Because back on page 37, we talk about the funding status of some of those items. What page 37 is actually reflecting is what that liability would have been if we were going to report it in the current year.
So that is a liability, right?
That is a liability.
Okay. And we're only funding...
Well, and the difficult part with the OPEB is, because what this captures is the employees that have left, in addition to the employees that are here, and their right to health insurance on the city's health plan. So what gets captured is a benefit that you all are providing right now that someone else is going to use in the future when they retire.
Right.
So there's no plan to fund it and put it into. If we were going to, and again, this is some actuarial fund that comes into play as well. What this is trying to drive home is that you are incurring expenses that aren't cash expenses, and you're incurring them each year. If you were going to fund that, this is what it would cost today to fund all that in the future. But there's nothing that needs to be funded today because it doesn't require the city to have cash on hand to account for those health insurance premiums that retirees are getting the benefit of.
But at some point in the future, they do have to be paid, right?
And what truly happens is you're paying for it each year as it comes up. And the way the city's paying for it is because the city is paying higher rates for current employees right now because you have people in the plan that are causing those rates to be higher. So you're paying in the current year an amount, because again, keep in mind, when the retired employee leaves, what really they're getting the opportunity to do is pay their own premiums and stay in a big plan as opposed to trying to go out and find it on their own. So they're benefiting from being in that larger plan to the detriment of the city because the city has to pay higher premiums on behalf of their current employees. It's not helping you, I can tell.
You can read my face. Okay. In that sense,
I'm truly not sure the best way to help get you there.
Can I attempt to maybe re-summarize and see if I'm connecting the dots, because this is something else. So that $852,120 is the dollar amount that represents the value of what some actuary somewhere estimates our increased premium costs are on our current active city employees for health insurance. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. So that's really the total amount, and so I guess the calculation on page 37 is simply an estimation of what. I'm not really sure why. It's probably just an accounting requirement that we have to have it. It doesn't really have any practical operating impact. It's just a different way of reflecting the financial damage that carrying a bunch of retirees who no longer work for the city are doing to our health insurance premiums.
That's a fair way to say it.
Does that muddy the waters at all? Or clear anything up? So another way of saying this is if we just arbitrarily decided tomorrow to drop all of our retirees from the cities that are currently paying their own premiums for the city's health insurance, then we might expect our remaining employees' health insurance premiums to go down by an actuary would say $852,120. Or maybe that's over the course of several years.
It
Because
might
that's
be over the
pretty
course,
big number.
but that is, the point of that is that if you were to drop off higher risk members of that plan, it would be cheaper for the city.
Okay. Well, the other thing that kind of I wonder about on page 37 is just above that total, there's two lines that are annual OPEB cost, $121,000, contribution made $53,000. So it's like we really ought to be contributing another $60,000 there.
Well, and I think what it's really reflecting is saying that cost is what it would be if you were trying to fund that liability in the future.
Okay.
What you did come out of pocket for was that $53,000 in the current year, which is what causes that OPEB number to increase.
Okay.
But again, the point is, it's not a plan that you're attempting to fund for the future, as opposed to the pension asset, which you are funding for the future.
Let me move on. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm certain I didn't help very much, though.
Let me go back to page 45. Under expenditures and uses of funds, Public Works, street maintenance services, shows we spend an actual $3.4 million. Can somebody, surely we didn't spend that much on street maintenance.
And it's not, the construction of the Public Works building is under the category of Public Works. And as you point that out, what's sitting in there is are the budgeted amounts and the actual amounts that were in there for the Public Works building.
Well, isn't that a little kind of, I mean, on the surface, that says street maintenance. Wouldn't it be?
Alderman Miguel, I cannot argue with you that, as I'm looking at it right now, I wish I had two line items for you.
Okay. All right. I'll take you up on that. Next thing.
I will make a note and make sure that that is consistent next time.
Very good. That's all I have. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Miguel. Any other comments or questions?
You're welcome.
Seeing none. All right, thank you, Mr. Jones. I appreciate it.
You are welcome.
City Clerk, make sure that this copy of this is entered into the record. And we will move on to other items.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mark. Okay, next item on the agenda, an appeal from Tom Batch, 8687 Party Lane, the fee charged for moving a home in Crestwood as stated in ordinance section 7-15. Is Mr. Batch here? Mr. Batch, please state your name.
Yes, I am here. Thomas Batch, 87 Party Lane.
All right, Mr. Batch, will you please give us tell us why you're here this evening and give us a little background on that?
Well, under the circumstances of moving this house once again, the city has come up with a charge of $2,000 to move it, which last time I had to move the house, there was no fee charged. The city is already collecting a review fee of $200, a contractor's fee of $50, and a construction fee based on the cost of the project. Then from there, it has to go to St. Louis County and get reviewed and paid, and 3 charges over there. So I think this is a little redundant, and for what purposes? As I'm not using the city streets to move the property, I'm moving from my property to my property at my expense. Why is the city involved at all? That would be my question. And has there ever been a charge on any structure moved since 1966 when this ordinance was put into effect?
Is that all your comments you have other than your questions, sir?
At this
point, okay. City Administrator Simpson, do you mind giving us the city's position to answer that question if possible?
Well, I can't answer the historic question Mr. Batch posed, but I guess so we can get something clear for the record, Mr. Batch, your appeal is essentially requesting a waiver of the relocating a house fee. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
Okay. Is there anything else associated with your appeal request that you wish to get on the record? Just so that we understand the totality of what you're asking the board to consider tonight.
The fee seems like the city is triple dipping, quadruple dipping. I mean, what is the purpose of this fee? There is no, you're not supplying any police, nothing. You're just, I'm moving the house while you're in bed probably. So why does the city have their hand out for more, or in my back pocket, I should say? You know, I did a favor for the community and saved this house from being destroyed 10 years ago or 8 years ago at my own expense. And the repayment I got from the city is they voluntarily gave up the Public Works Department to let MSD come in. So they have the power of eminent domain, which they threatened, and 3 days before our court date, they finally settled because I told them I'd take it to a jury trial. I didn't care. So they undervalued my property and they overvalued your property, which was a Public Works Department. And the reason I know this is because 20 years ago, I had it under contract, under a sealed bid for $300,000. And I would like to know how a property that was valued at $300,000 20 years ago is now worth $3.76 million. And all that was added was a salt dome. And by the way, another thought, when the audit gentleman said that the building cost was $2.7 million, is that a correct assumption?
Of the new facility?
Of the new Public Works Department?
I thought it was more like, was it 2.4 or 3.4 million?
The bid amount was 3.7.
No, that's not what the audit said. He said 2.7 million is what the building cost.
I think, you know, the audit, we're getting sort of far afield here, Mr.
Well, this will come to circle.
The audit encapsulates the value of the project that was in progress, the construction in progress at 12/31/17. There was a significant amount of construction done after that, which is why there would be a discrepancy.
A lot of times the board is not informed of all information. So if this audit is correct, the building cost $2.7 million and MSD paid you $3.7 million. That's approximately 37% more. Who in their right mind pays 37% more for a project, for a product? So it sounds like the city was the beneficiary of a windfall at the expense of the citizens on Party Lane.
Mr. Batch, the Public Works facility at 12/31/17 didn't have a parking lot. It didn't have a salt dome.
I don't care what it had. I'm talking about the actual cost.
Its value
to put this
at
in, and what MSD paid you to the city.
Its
and
value
the board
at
needs to understand this,
12/31/17
not from you as a city administrator. They need to hear this, what is going on here.
I think a point of information is in order with what City Administrator Simpson is trying to tell you, that the budget deals with a certain set of time. So at that time, it's the project what is put into that audit and that budget. So therefore, there's additional cost after that budget year is accumulated.
So do we know exactly what this building is costing the city of Crestwood?
What it's costing the city of Crestwood?
Right.
It's, well, the additional scope of work that the Board of Aldermen approved in a public meeting for the construction of covered parking and for the construction of a neighboring parking lot and an ADA access ramp to Grants Trail. That's the city's cost, aside from staff time. Everything else the city's been reimbursed for, and the city's not making any money off of the MSD reimbursement. There's no discrepancy between what the building's costing us and what MSD is giving us.
Well, we can look into that when the final bills come in.
Okay. So anyways,
so this is
now
what
that
I'm saying is,
hold on, actually, if you don't mind, sir. City Administrator Simpson needs to finish the point, and then if you have additional comments, I'll come back to you, but he needs to address actually the city stands.
Yeah,
if you don't mind.
So you stated your appeal, and that's really all the board is here to consider. You have alternative questions, and certainly, you know, you're entitled to answers to those, but we could take those up at a later time. Just to provide the city's, the background from the city's perspective on this, Mr. Batch's appeal requests a waiver of certain fees. Section 715 of the municipal code establishes the permit requirements for moving building, and that section of the code specifies a fee of $2,000. As stated, Mr. Batch is requesting the city waive the fee, but the code does not permit city staff to selectively waive the fees, and so Mr. Batch's appeal requests the board to waive this fee. And at this point, I'd ask the city attorney to please provide a legal opinion as to whether or not it is legally permissible for the Board of Aldermen to waive this fee.
Sure, thank you. The code, as City Administrator Simpson noted, the code does not provide, as it's written now, does not provide the city any authority or discretion to waive the fee. And the case law is such that unless the code provides for such discretion, the city, including the Board of Aldermen, would not have the authority to waive a fee. Also of concern under these circumstances would be a question as to whether waiving the fee would be in compliance with the Missouri Constitution, as it could also be considered a grant of public funds for a private purpose when there is no authority to waive the fee.
Thank you, and that's all I have.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody on the board care to comment at this time? See no comments. Mr. Batch, I'll allow you. I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, sorry. In reading your email, City Attorney, you talked about something to the effect that if moving this house was not for Mr. Batch's purpose, but for the city-wide's benefit, then we could legally pass that. Didn't you talk about that? Because I think saving this house really has nothing to do with you, but everything to do with the history of the city. So I'm not sure, he's getting anything out of it. I think the whole city is.
Well, I think the issue under the Constitution is any expenditure, any time you would waive a fee or what would be considered giving, because there's an obligation under the code to pay the fee. So if you all waive it, you're essentially granting those funds to the individual who you're waiving it to. Now, you can do that if you find it serves a public purpose, but the standard for a public purpose would have to be that it outweighs any sort of benefit to a private individual. And we would need to, if that was challenged, we would need to be able to prove that.
Well, can I ask a question? I don't think you're getting any personal benefit out of this, are you?
No, I've tried to save this house because, it was built in 1844. It's a founding family of Crestwood, the Sappingtons. And there's only 3 homes like this in the state of Missouri, Carpenter Gothic, architectural. And I find it very odd that the city attorney has taken this stance since 8 or 10 years ago. This city waived the fee. So they already set a precedent.
When you moved it from.
Yes. So, I think it's real simple. You can waive the fee. And if it's challenged, it would be in my favor, I guarantee you.
Alderman Brady, did you have any other further comments or questions?
Yeah, I don't see what benefit Mr. Batch gets from this. I think it's a city-wide benefit, so that's my...
In fact, once I move the house, I'll entertain selling it to the city at a very reasonable fee, if they want to keep it in their arsenal of historic structures.
Thank you, Mr. Branch. If you don't mind, actually, as the board asks questions to have discussion, please let them ask questions and do not interfere as they're having discussion unless entertained, please. City Administrator Simpson.
I just had one question because Alderman Breeding raised the point of any sort of benefit, though you started to address it a little bit. I guess what are your intentions with the Arban house? Are you intending to sell the property? Are you intending to rent it out?
I don't know. If whatever works best for me at that time. But my first intention was to save the home for the future children of this country, so they understand how people lived and who came here first before us.
So I guess along those lines, where I'm getting at is if you were intending to sell it or rent it out for occupancy, then you would collect some sort of rent, or you collect a
Well,
sale.
I pay tax, so I have an obligation to do something.
But if you were benefiting, you would sell it or rent it out, which would benefit you financially, and therefore weaken the public purpose argument. If you instead moved it but converted it to a museum and dedicated it to the city, then there's a little bit of a stronger ground to say that there's a public purpose there. Not to say, speak for the board, that the board would accept such a dedication, but you understand there's a difference between you selling the home and renting it and you making it available for the public.
But if you look at the situation here, basically by the city offering their public works department to MSD, they have forced them, they have eminent domain rights to take my property. They didn't need anybody else's property, they needed mine.
Were you compensated for your property?
Well, not compensated to what I believe it's worth.
But you agreed you settled with them?
I settled with them.
Okay.
Because they can take the house. Have you ever been into an eminent domain situation?
Not personally.
Okay. Well, you really don't have much say. They have their appraisers look at the house, the judge rules it's theirs, and that's it. Now, you want to take them back to court, that's another issue.
Thank you, Mr. Patch.
I actually have a couple questions for Mr. Patch, kind of piggybacking on what I was going to ask. So you own the house, not an organization or a 501c or anything like that, or charity type organization, nonprofit. You actually own the home, correct?
Right.
Okay. So, by piggybacking on top of the intent, is the intent ever to, are you trying to set up a museum to show the house? Are there tours available at home? Set hours of operation or any type of business aspect? As far as when I say business aspect, just meaning, we have an hours of operation for tours or historical sites. Do gatherings ever take place there with historical societies or anything of that type of matter? Does any of those type of things happen?
Well, it's on the historic registry. I mean,
it's just a historic.
Yeah, it's just an historic home.
Okay.
But nothing has taken place at this point. But that's not to say in the future, if the city, they may agree to something, that they could take over ownership.
And
I'm not opposed to that. I was trying to save the home.
And I understand that point. But I guess I'm just asking because I didn't know, in theory, then if a fee is waived, it benefits the owner, correct?
Well, let's go a step further. Why don't we just abolish this fee, the entire ordinance? Because obviously, if I'm the only one in 50 years that has moved the home, then, and what is the real purpose of this fee? It's an outrageous fee for what I'm doing. I mean, there's no other fee in St. Louis County like this.
I mean, I'm assuming one could have negotiated the fee into the moving of the home.
Well, there was never told about this fee until I came up for a permit. And by the way, the 3-day review has turned into a 5-week ordeal, which is, I have a schedule to meet with my home mover. He's moving a big mill for Bass Pro down.
Well, I'm assuming that has something to do with the fact that you're appealing the fee.
Well, no, that was just last week. They've been dragging this out forever, and I still have to go to St. Louis County to get this approved.
Gotcha. Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Batch or discussion on the board? Seeing none. Man, you were right on it, right after I said none. Alderman McDowell.
I was holding off on someone as I could. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Picking up on Mr. Batch's comment, does the ordinance really serve a purpose? I mean, would it be valid to, again, if that ordinance has not been applied for 50 years, if it was waived once before, is there merit to getting rid of it? So I just throw that out for the board to consider.
Well, if I may speak, obviously not all home relocations are as relatively straightforward as Mr. Batch's, although there are plenty of complications, even with moving it just a few lots down the road. This ordinance is designed for any home relocations in the city of Crestwood, which means it could be using the public roadways, it could require coordination from public safety personnel. There's also language in the ordinance that talks about making sure that it is done in accordance with all of the relevant proper permits and inspections and everything to ensure that the home doesn't do damage to any public or private property while it is being moved. I know at the very least, isn't there going to be a question of Ameren UE's electric, the clearance with electrical lines or something with relocating the home?
I don't recall right at this time.
Okay.
I'd have to look at the plans and see what.
You might want to address me on that.
Okay.
There is no. It's moving from my property to my property.
I thought there were lines.
No, we're moving from yard to yard.
Okay.
We're moving at 125 feet.
I thought there were lines in between.
No, we're not. There's no one involved. Mm-hmm. Last time there was about 30 people involved because we had the state highway to deal with. We had Union Electric. We had the stoplights. It was much bigger. This is a very simple. We're sliding the house next door. Mm-hmm. I'm not using your property. I'm not using this public right of way. I'm not using anything of the city's.
Now, another reason that we have fees in place is because there's a significant amount of staff time and review involved. Chief Oliveri is looking over at me meaningfully. Chief, do you have anything to add on what's involved in reviewing and ensuring that the home relocation goes smoothly?
Well, I believe you covered it very well, but it's any project of this nature requires time and effort and review by city officials. The fire marshal's office as well as the public works department are both involved. And obviously just depending on the scope and nature of the project, it depends on how much time and how much effort's involved and how much expense the city might be incurring, related to those projects. But
I've already paid a review fee. So the review fee is already in there. This is a separate fee.
Well, that review fee is more for the zoning purposes. I think it's appropriate to conclude that the fee for the moving the building is really associated with A, making sure that it's done in accordance with all governing laws and procedures, and B, making sure that the home, when it's moved, that certain things like the gas is disconnected safely, that there's no fire hazards from the electrical, and then when it's moved to its new location and connected, that everything again is done and inspected appropriately. And the city does incur time and expense with that.
Thank you, City Minister. Alderman Johnson, I believe you're next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recall being around that early morning. It was very cold when the house was moved before. Am I correct? And all moving down the street and all the Ameren people pushing up the wire so the house could get under it and everything. It was quite an ordeal. It was fascinating for my children to see that. I had never seen that before. And there was no fee charged then?
No.
And we can verify that through our records that there was no fee for that. That was a move. I mean, that was down Watson and then down the street that it's on. I'm concerned that that fee wasn't charged then, and now that it's being charged, and it's just the scope is so much different than that move was before. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Brady.
Thank you. Logistically, how does this just require a voice vote to override the 2,000, or how are we doing that?
After discussion under the code, the board needs to either affirm, overrule, or modify the city staff's decision to impose the fee. And we would do that either by a voice vote or a roll call, depending on how the chair calls it.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't sure if this required some sort of ordinance, but a voice vote
No.
makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman Stack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have several questions, and I think it's probably going to be to the city. How long has this section of code been in place that institutes a fee for moving a house?
A long time. I'm just looking at the footnote here on the code page, and it goes back to 1965.
Okay, and for how long has that fee been set at $2,000?
Well, the last time it was amended was 1966, so I'd say 1966.
So a long time. Okay, does St. Louis County have any fee at all for moving a house that we're aware of?
I'm not aware. Mr. Gillen, are you aware at all?
I'm not aware of any fee.
Okay. Can anyone confirm if a fee was charged when this house was originally moved? Because I share the concerns that we didn't charge it the first time and now we are. I'm curious as to why it didn't happen the first time and we're doing it now.
I'm speculating since I wasn't around.
Yeah, sure.
But
Understood.
the home relocation was done in connection with an economic development redevelopment project. And my suspicion is that such a project was somewhat controversial, as they can be from time to time, especially when it involves a historic home. And anyone that was around then, feel free to correct me. But I'm assuming that the city waived it because it was anticipating the redevelopment of that and wanted to facilitate any road bumps that might be in the way. That's my non-educated opinion.
No, that's okay. And it kind of just leads me then to my opinion. So I feel that if we waived it before, my concern is I want to make sure that we are staying within the law. Based on what our city attorney has said, we don't legally have the right to waive it, but obviously we did waive it at one point. And if that's the case, and we're within our rights then to waive it then I think we should be able to waive it now, and it seems like it would be appropriate to do so. That's all I have to say on it.
Thank you, Alderman Satter. Alderman Maybe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this was kind of a fascinating subject. I read all the materials for Mr. Batch and the city, went back and read that old newspaper article where the house was moved from down Watson. And I mean, that was a massive ordeal, and I can only imagine the amount of intergovernmental coordination between the state and the county and the fire department, the police department,
highway department.
I mean, the overtime, the block side streets. I mean, frankly, something like that should probably have a fee of like $20,000. I mean, just because that's just, I imagine, was a weeks of preparation to do that. So as far as just abolishing the fee, even though it doesn't come up very often because people don't move houses very often, it's a fee I think that's appropriate on the books. It's funny, we haven't adjusted it since the 60s. I just used the inflation calculator on the government CPI side, and had we kept pace with inflation, that fee today should be $15,504. And so I guess in some ways you could say it's a bargain. I will say, as a practical matter, I think its application is very unfair today. It seems like you got to break the last time, where to me there should have been a significant fee in excess of $2,000. I wrote down 5 to 10 was my thought for moving a house down Watson, but when you're moving it across 2 yards and there's a minor amount of public input, to me that fee should be less. And so I'm not writing new code right now, but to me, potentially there should be a difference based on how massive or substantial of a home moving project there is. So anyway, that's just my thoughts. I mean, on this particular one, I think it's unfair, but I read the city attorney's analysis of the cases and the Constitution. I don't see where we have the discretion to do anything here today. So I sympathize. I think it's an unfair application today, but I don't see where we have the discretion to do anything based on my read of the cases. I would appeal to MSD to cover this, given the relationship, but that's just where I'm coming down in this.
All right, thank you, Mr. Maybe. Mr. Iowa,
Let me reply to him first on this. The reason why we're in the exact same situation, this is an economic development plan to benefit Crestwood. As the strip center was put in where the home originally was at Old Sappington and Watson, it was waived. The same way it can be waived this time, because the benefit is to the city with the new Public Works Department, economic development. So it falls right into the exact same pretense it originally was waived for. Therefore, I plead with the board to use common sense and not tyrannical government
We're still having discussion. Thank you. Alderman Iowa.
Mr. Batch, would you please tell me what is your deadline to move this home? The deadline. When do you need to move this home?
Well, it has to be moved, it has to be in place, done by August. It has to be out of there, well, it was supposed to be in May, we were supposed to be up in.
So I have a question for City Administrator. Can we modify this ordinance and make it more flexible so the board can have a choice to decide to waive that fee or do something? Can we do that?
If Mr. Batch indicated that there's no reason for the board to make this decision tonight, then yeah, there's nothing that prevents the board from modifying the ordinance as it sees fit.
I believe that we should probably go this way tonight. I agree with Alderman Maybe. I think it's an unfair fee for what it's going to entail, and I believe we need to have some more flexibility as a board, and right now we don't have that flexibility, so we should find ways to modify this ordinance and help Mr. Batch in this case. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Iowa. Alderman Motel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll throw my memories out there. I was on the board when the house was moved previously. My recollection of the situation is that the house was located on a piece of property that was under eminent domain. And the house, it was under the piece of property was under the threat of eminent domain. And the house would be knocked down. Mr. Batch stepped up and offered his property. Of course, there are, certainly advantages to him to having a house on an empty lot.
Well, it wasn't an empty lot. I told him
Mr. Batch. Mr. Batch, you can speak after me. So Mr. Batch offered to, and the city wanted to save that house. But it certainly came up in board discussion, and the board pretty much kind of bent over backwards to wanting to save the historic home. I don't recall the subject of a fee coming up, but because I can't recall doesn't mean the subject didn't come up. But the move itself was paid for by the developer. It was incorporated in, the moving costs were incorporated into the CID. At least that's my recollection. And I think the cost for the move was something in the area of $60,000 or $80,000. Now, I guess if Mr. Batch were to take the position that would have no alternative except to take the house down, he could probably do that. And then perhaps the city might speak up and say we need to save that house. I don't know. So, like Alderman maybe says, as a board, do we have discretion on the matter? And legally, it sounds like we have little discretion. That's all I have, Your Honor. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman. Alderman, maybe you're next.
I don't think I have I guess I'll wrap up with a final thought, and I guess I'll a question for the city attorney, and then maybe make some motions. Just one observation. I guess there's a chance this fee was rolled into what the developer paid the last time. I guess there's also a chance the fee wasn't paid. I guess there's a difference between a fee not being charged and a fee being waived, though, as well. In the past, due diligence from the city on certain things was lacking. One of the aldermen sitting over there made some remarks last time. We have a metal shed, O'Reilly Auto Parts, in the city that's in violation of all kinds of codes, and it got rubber stamped just because people weren't paying enough attention. So it could just be city sloppiness. It could be the developer paid the fee. But there's a difference between a fee not being charged and a fee being waived. Trying to be fair here, and a question for the city attorney, just logistically. And if you need to think about this, we can try to table this or move forward. But if there was some kind of revised fee schedule, some kind of a sliding scale, I'm not sure what that would look like. It would be based, I think, in fairness, on the difficulty of a move. If you have a move that shuts down a state highway and takes up a month of staff time, to me that should be a massive fee. When you're sliding it a few yards over, and we still have to check a couple things, but it's not as much work, that should be a very small fee. Could Mr. Batch withdraw this appeal, resubmit it if we have a new statutory scheme in place in, say, a month? Is that permissible?
Yes, City Attorney.
Yes, I mean, it's up to, the city has the authority to change the ordinance, and I think that if that's what the city wants to do, certainly legally, I'm much more comfortable with any sort of waiver if the ordinance either has a sliding scale or allowed discretion to do so. The city, procedurally, we can handle it one of two ways. If it's acceptable to Mr. Batch, you could just table the consideration of this appeal until after the consideration of the ordinance, or he could withdraw it, and then you could enact the ordinance. Mr. Gillum could act under the new ordinance, and if Mr. Batch wanted to file an appeal later, he could do so.
Okay, just something along those lines. If the city moves forward on a path like that, do you think that would work with your schedule if you have till August, if we look at a new ordinance, say, in a month?
Well, here's what I'd like the board to do. Release the, because everything is approved at this point except for this fee, because I said I refuse to pay that fee under these circumstances. So I need my plans to go to St. Louis County so they can approve it, because that's going to take another month. And then after that's approved, then I can come back to the board. There's no sense in sitting idle for a month when St. Louis County can be doing their work.
I mean, I'll let the city attorney speak. I don't know if legally, again, that puts us in a waiver situation. I think you'd probably have to pay the $2,000 into escrow, and then we'd have to look at some kind of a refund if the permit was amended. But I mean, the way you suggested, I don't think that's going to work. That sounds problematic, but I'll let the city attorney speak as to that.
I think that would be problematic, and I was going to look at Mr. Gillum, because I think that, I mean, that's the whole idea, is we can't, the city, once the city releases it, once it goes to the county, the city loses its authority over the situation. So I don't think that would necessarily work.
I guess a question for the city attorney. I mean, is this, we have a meeting, the second meeting in May. Is this an ordinance that we could have in place at that meeting?
I could certainly,
for your schedule?
As long as Mr. Simpson would agree, I could certainly get it on the agenda, have it prepared.
Yeah, I'd like, if we want to move that quickly, it would be great to get some direction from the board in terms of just conceptually what you're looking for. Is it a sliding scale? Is it?
I mean, for something like this, I think the permit would be a couple $100 just for a staff to make sure that it's being properly moved. If someone wants to move a house from, Ward 2 up, up at like Big Bend and Sappington and move it down, Sappington Road and Watson and plant it next to White Cliff Park, to me, that's a $20,000 move or a $15,000 move. I mean, I think the $2,000 would probably need to go up for certain kinds of moves. Whereas something like this, I think it's a little unfair to charge $2,000 for the amount of review the city's giving. So that would be my thought, is we'd need a pretty large scale. I'm not sure what that looks like.
It's interesting because my expectation would be that whether you're moving it 100 feet or a mile, from a city of Crestwood perspective, the amount of work is the same. It's maybe there's a little bit on the public safety side from police.
I think police overtime, closing intersections and things.
But that's really not where most of the expense is going to be. The expense is in the review. So to me, you would consider modifying the base fee to something that the board felt was appropriate for the amount of staff time that was in. Yeah, I get that highway department, Ameren, the county are all going to be involved. They can charge their own fees if they feel that they need to, but we're not collecting it on their behalf. We're not going to pay them for their service on this. So,
but I assume staff has to probably coordinate with those entities, though.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's some, but it's not as it's not as strong a correlation. You know, there's a certain amount of work that's always going to be done whether you're moving it 50 feet or 5 miles. And then there's, yeah, if it goes a little bit longer, then there's a marginal cost that's relatively smaller in comparison to the initial inspections and stuff and review that's required.
Well, I guess since we haven't looked at this since the 60s, I would like staff to look at this, figure out what is the time we would spend on a complex move versus a simple move, suggest some appropriate numbers, insert some board discretion, and bring us an updated ordinance next meeting. And if the applicant's generally okay with that timeline, waiting 2 weeks, that we'd postpone the consideration of this appeal till that time, and then take up the new ordinance and perhaps look at this in conjunction with our new ordinance that might allow us a little more flexibility that I don't think we have tonight.
One last comment. Crestwood doesn't have home inspectors. St. Louis County, that's what I pay them for. They
We
come
have a
and
fire
inspect.
marshal.
They come and inspect to make sure, but that would be under any house permit which I'm paying for. It's based, all it is a foundation. So I'm not building a whole new structure. So the fire inspector, he comes in and looks at everything then. But with the foundation, the house is pre-existing. So there's very little inspecting to do. It's the foundation. So all you're doing is picking it up, moving it over 150 feet and setting it down.
I'm thinking in concept we'll go with maybe a 2-tier fee where rather than a sliding scale, where we'll decide on a relatively short, simple move distance and have 1 fee, and then a more complex move that's over a greater distance will have another fee. So I'm anticipating at this point, though I'll have some discussions with staff, but I'm thinking right now we'll draft up a modification that has a lower fee for a simple move and a higher fee for more complex moves. And the lower fee is probably going to be below $2,000 by a decent bit, and the higher fee is probably going to be significantly higher than $2,000. And then maybe we'll if we can put some flexibility language in there too, we'll work on that. Does that sound like a fair approach?
And we can take up the details next time. I mean, is that 2 weeks? Does that generally work for your time level?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I would, I guess I'll move that we postpone the consideration of this appeal to the second meeting in May.
Seconded by Alderman Satter. I'm going to ask for some quick discussion before we vote. The only reason why is because there are lights on the table. Alderman Satter, did you want to add anything
The
additional?
only thing that I wanted to add was that we try to ensure that there is language in there that gives the board some flexibility should something come up where we did want to waive or reduce or adjust a fee.
For storage structures.
Alderman Satter, Alderman Iowes, you had
A question for the city attorney. Discretion of the board, what does it mean? My question for you is this. So we decide to add some discretion for the board to waive that fee, but how can we make sure that someone else that we might deny the waive is not going to come at the city say, hey, you waived that fee for that person, but you decided for that person to not waive that fee, it's unfair, stuff like this. How are we making sure that if we had some discretion, we are not putting the city in some kind of problematic situation?
Yeah, and that's the problem with putting discretion into ordinances, and that's why there probably isn't one now.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly we would try to draft it in a way where there are certain standards. It's going to still, you're going to need, if you're going to waive it, you need to find that it's still a public purpose.
Yes.
There will be that standard. And beyond that, we'll try to put in some other things so that it's not completely subjective, so that other applicants can't use it that way.
And a comment from you, Sabaj. We are trying to help you. One thing I would love you to do is, if it's possible, is to consider how you could open that home to the public. Because you said it's historic that you saved it for the children to be able to see that. I think if we help you out, it would be great to see one day that home being open to the public. I don't know if you can do that, maybe working with the city, I don't know, but that would be great. That, we see one day that home open. So, as you said, the children, our kids can visit this home and see how people used to live before. I don't think it's the case right now. It's not open to the public, so think about that, please.
That's it.
And I do have a comment. I actually was going to suggest before we do table this, that the language being brought forth to the city just simply give us a clause to waive the fee at this time in order for saving time purposes. I mean, I highly doubt before the next meeting we're going to have another home move, so maybe we can perfect the language at a future date, but just have a clause that we could, if the board so chooses, to waive the fee at the next meeting. Alderman Miguel, did you have additional comments?
I prefer not having discretion in the rewrite. I like Mr. Simpson's idea of having a low fee and a high fee. How long was it since this came up? Mr. Batch is the only one. This is the only time it's come up since the law was 1966. So let's make it cut and dry. The discretion or the change to the current ordinance could merely be something which addresses Mr. Batch's situation. It seems to me that's really all we need.
Thank you, Alderman Miguel. Alderman Maybe.
I'll withdraw my further comments till next time. I'm ready to vote on the postponement until next meeting.
All right. With that, I'll call for the vote, a voice vote for the postponement of the next meeting. So you already have first and second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? No. Ayes clearly have it. We will postpone to the next meeting.
All right, I have just two final comments.
We're ready to move on, sir.
All right, but I think this needs to be said when considering rewriting the bill. I think it'd be very simple that if you do it for historic structures or properties that are being enforced by eminent domain by public entities such as MSD or the city's benefit, which is what is happened here. The city is benefited by this. I think those would be two things that you can section out, and that will be it.
All right. Thank you for your comment, sir. All right, moving on to public hearings. We have none. Going on to the Mayor, Board of Aldermen, and City Administrator reports and/or comments. Alderman Reed.
Yeah, I do have one comment. Actually, I saw something at one of our local grocery stores 2 weeks ago during my weekly shopping that was frustrating. And I just thought I'd share this with everyone because I've never seen it before, but I saw someone panhandling inside one of our grocery stores. And what's funny is that same night as I was driving down Watson doing my grocery shopping and all that fun stuff, I just thought, you know, we can't have too many police in the area. And then here I am standing at the cash register, one of our local grocery stores, and this gentleman's asking people for money. And it was just weird that same night I said to myself, you know, who cares what we spend on police? And then that happens to me at this establishment. I just, I don't know what we can do. You know, can't have the police everywhere, but it's kind of sad to see that happen. And you know, just thought I'd share that. It was weird happening in our local town. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Breen. Alderman Duncan.
I have a few things I'd like to say. I didn't get to say anything when I was sworn in. I would like to reiterate it's a privilege to be a Ward 1 Alderman. I look forward to working with this mayor, even though he's not here in this board. I want to thank Daryl again for his exemplary service, but everybody please remember he did sit next to me for 4 years before when he started on the board too. I'd like to see that businesses in the city, Vladimir, who is extraordinaire Taylor, he moved from Crestwood Executive Center to where Yoglor is. What an asset he is to have. The best place to get any clothes altered or anything. And we have a Hallmark store back. And I think that is very good to have. And the Crestview resolution reminded me that my mother-in-law was a charter occupant of Crestview when it first opened, so I just remember that. A couple of things. I subscribe to what Rudy Giuliani once called the broken windows theory, that if you let small things go, it appears that nobody cares about your community. So I really do believe in strong code enforcement, and I think that's been great. we have to maintain a safe, vibrant, and affordable city. Last week, I was here when Adam Jones was running that meeting when PGAV was there. It was great to see Alderman Navy, Alderman Charbonneau, and Alderman Ives there. It was great. I sat with several residents, and they were very concerned about maintaining the quality of our city. That's great. I always have to thank my husband for putting up with all my ambitions that I have. I said this at the last time I was sworn in. My dad took me to smoke-filled ward meetings back when I was a kid in South City, and that really, piqued my interest in politics. I'm optimistic about the mall. I think we'll see great development. And it's also good to be sitting here with 2 other women on the dais. We need more, and I hope to see that in the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Alderman Dunn. Alderman Satter.
Thank you. We did have a beautification committee meeting last Tuesday, and I'm actually going to defer most of that report to Alderman Ives because he was taking much more thorough notes than I was at that meeting. However, we are going to have a volunteer planning opportunity this Saturday here at City Hall at 9 a.m. So if anybody's looking to come out and get their hands dirty, we could sure use some help. The horticulture department at Merrimack Community College donated 6 flats of plants and flowers to beautify Crestwood, and I think a lot of those are going to go into the ground this weekend. And finally, this is just a question. I noticed this actually as I was driving here, and I should have taken a picture, but in the Shop and Save parking lot, I've noticed now that there is a towing company sign that is now up, that people can be towed from the Shop and Save parking lot, and I typically associate those kind of signs with kind of shady organizations in the city because I work in the city and I've had people have their cars towed improperly. So I was just curious if the city was aware of this and if it's something that we had approved of or if we needed to approve of or if we needed to be worried about.
I can't say I'm necessarily aware of the change. Jim, anything come across your desk on it? I mean, I don't think they have to have a permit or anything for the right to do that. It's their lot, but yeah, that's I guess that's all I can say about that.
No, that's all I have.
Thank you, Alderman Satter. We'll go to Alderman Navy.
Alderman Duncan referenced it. We had a planning and zoning meeting on May the 2nd, and in addition, Alderman Duncan, Alderman Sherman, Alderman Ives, and myself attended. Mayor Roby was there, and anecdotally, the chairman thought it was one of the highest attended planning and zoning meetings they had seen in recent memory. Probably 30-ish people in attendance, and a good, vibrant discussion, and everyone talking about some of the things they would like to see in the city as we work on amending the zoning code. So we look forward to embarking on that journey. It should take a year, and so hopefully we'll wind up with a good work product. And that's all I've got.
Thank you, Alderman Navy. Alderman Miguel.
No report, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman Miguel. Alderman Ives.
Yes, so I want to start off with saying that I'm very happy to be part of this board for the next 3 years. I had my first meeting with the beautification committee, and too bad I don't have my notes, so I just quickly. But one thing that I posted on Facebook is that we have a planting this coming Saturday, I think at 10 here. So if you can join, that would be great. I think I'm going to try to come with my wife and my kids to do that. We spoke also about the Crestwood Holidays Lighthouse Decorating Contest. We are looking for Ward captains. I guess I'm going to be one of them for Ward 4. Basically, the idea is to try to find people and motivate people and spread out the word about the contest. What else? I went as well to the zoning workshop. Great turnout. I learned a lot of stuff over there. Had the chance to talk with a couple of people, and yeah, it was very great to see that attendance. So very good 2 weeks for me.
Thank you, Alderman Ives. City Administrator Simpson.
Yeah, let's see. I guess the only thing I have, the city a week ago received this Civic Leader Award. This is from the checkup program they held, which is through UMSL. CHEC stands for Citizen Education Clearinghouse. And they had their 50th anniversary celebration, and we were recognized as a civic leader because we have been regular annual supporters of the My Logo program, which is Missouri Youth and Local Government. We bring in third graders from area elementary schools. They get one-on-one time with the department heads and myself and other members of the city staff, learning about what the city does. They get to go and have a really fun time outside exploring all of our exciting vehicles, a fire truck, a dump truck, a bulldozer, that sort of thing. Have a great time, run around, spend a lot of energy out there, and then at the end of it all, after a brief snack, they come in and actually take the role of the Board of Aldermen and members of the public and debate issues. So I wasn't able to attend the most recent one, but I know like one of the issues that they talked about was whether or not to add another water slide on their park's water park. And they had members of the board up here, and they had folks that were for and folks that were against, and they have to write their position and argue and come up and testify why this should or shouldn't be done. And then the students who are playing the board members have to ultimately vote and decide, which is just like you guys do. And just like it sometimes happens in local government, things become a little bit of a zoo. But they had a lot of fun. I know the one time I sat up here with the students, they actually voted down the water slide proposal because it would be too noisy and it would cut down too many trees, which I thought was amazing that a group of third graders could not agree to build a new water slide. It's just amazing to me, the maturity of thought there. So anyways, we were obviously really pleased to be recognized. It's a great program and it's a lot of fun. We get a lot of good remarks from staff for offering it. It's nice to have the kids here, and obviously we get good reviews from the teachers in the program itself. So we'll continue supporting that in the future.
That's great to hear. Thank you. City Attorney.
No report.
All right, and I will take the liberty of going last for a brief moment here. I do want to thank everyone who did come out to the planning and zoning meeting. It was great to see everyone. I do want to congratulate Alderman Duncan and Alderman Iowes to coming to the board. Look forward to working with you both. I will touch briefly on the panhandling. I think maybe, Chief, if we can make that maybe a point on one of the upcoming police board meetings, if not this month, but maybe in the future. Myself, I've actually witnessed one section of across Big Bend in the interstate, kind of by Sam's. It happens quite frequently, and I have to tell you that I've had some negative trying to help people before, then been burned, and I think we all get a little upset about that. But I have to share a story that probably about a month ago, I noticed that there were sandwiches there. That clearly someone had purchased sandwiches from Sam's Club to give to one of the panhandler, and they were left on the side of the road. And it's extremely infuriating. I know that we do have an opioid epidemic, but it is frustrating to see that good-hearted people do exist out there and then trying to help someone, and they completely ignore that help and continue to take people for granted. With that, before I move on, I just want to say, because I don't want to pull this from the consent agenda, because I'm sure they're ready to go home. But I do agree with the appointments of Tim Anderson, former Alderman Anderson, to the Civil Service Board. He's a great individual. Look forward to him serving on that board. And also Dustin Imgarten. I have to tell you, Dustin is a friend of mine. Inquired about applying and being on serving the community, lives in the community. I think he's a great asset in the future of this community. It's nice to see younger individuals who care about their community want to get on board. So I wholeheartedly endorse them to those appointments. With that, moving on to public comment. Is there anyone on this side? Clearly not. So, anyone on this side of the room like to have a public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on to old business. And City Administrator, I am going to turn it over to you to talk about the city logo survey results.
Sure. So as you all will recall, at a recent meeting this year, the board directed staff to conduct a survey of our residents regarding the proposed city logos. We had keep the same go with the logo that was presented by one of our residents and go with the logo that was designed by a graphic designer retained by the city. We advertised it in the city newsletter, on social media, website, and received a pretty good response. Over 900 responses in total, so a pretty good response for some of our surveys. And the results were 45% voted to keep the old current logo. It was 404 votes. The green C, the one that was designed by the designer retained by the city, received 40% of the votes, 361. And then the logo that was designed by our residents received 131 votes, or 15%. So, a pretty decent majority of folks feel that we should just keep the old logo. And, personally, this is something that was a project that I thought would be, pretty quick and sealed up, and here we are 8 months later still dealing with it. I really don't have much more stomach for going back and forth on this one. My recommendation would be, let's just keep the old same thing and take this up again sometime in the future.
Thank you, City Minister. All right, we'll go to discussion. Alderman May.
I was going to say, everyone has their own personal opinions on what looks good, what looks bad. I think I voted for the green C logo, although I thought there was improvements that could have been made. But as this board knows, my art skills are, not up to par. So I don't profess to be, an expert on that subject. So my mind on this was, the logo should be something that a majority of the city buys in on, and with the current logo receiving the overwhelming plurality of the votes, I was going to go with the will of the residents and just move that we postpone this indefinitely and keep the status quo. But if there's other discussion, I'll come back on that motion.
There is other discussion. We will go to Alderman Iowa's.
Thank you. Yes, I had also a few comments from Ward 4 residents, and they all in favor of keeping the current logo. I disagree, but yes, I like one of them, the new one. But again, as Alderman maybe said, the will of the people is that they want to keep the old one, and I will also support that. And I also want to say a word about what I've read on social media when there was a discussion about the logo, and I personally understand why the city tries to change the logo. We try to brand the city. We're moving forward with different projects. We're trying to do something new. I understand also the position of our residents, and they have valid points as saying we don't want to spend money for more money with a new logo. But I'm very disappointed to see that some people just criticize with no solutions. I've seen that over and over on social media, and I know this is the nature of social media, but this board and the board before are just people, normal people who just want to serve and help the city and the community. And when I see, witness people just, going after elected officials and people, and I'm just disappointed to see so much negative criticism and no solutions provided, and just keyboard warriors just trying to say something bad about the city of Crestwood or this board, and I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to make a comment. I agree. I appreciate everyone's efforts. I know this thing turned into a lot bigger effort than was anticipated, and I do appreciate city staff's due diligence and time and effort they put into this to try to appease everyone. I do agree. Excuse me, there's certain merits to the old logo, but I would like to see a refresh. But at the same time, I think as we saw some new ideas and things, I think the old logo just kind of stood out a little bit. So I will support the will of the people and get behind that. The only way I could be, change my mind is if Alderman maybe would submit a hand-drawn logo. So, any further discussion on this topic? All right, Alderman maybe.
I was going to make my motion, but I will say somewhere way early on in this process, I think I actually did submit a super rough draft to Chris, so that can come back in a few years. But I'll move that we postpone the matter indefinitely.
There's a move to postpone the matter indefinitely. Is there a second? There's a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. The ayes have it. All right. Moving on, we will move to the approval of the consent agenda. Is there anyone that would like to remove anything from the consent agenda? Alderman IUS.
Yes, the minutes and the sewer lateral fund memo, please. The sewer lateral fund, yes. And the minutes.
Minutes and the sewer lateral fund. All right. Is that all?
Yes.
All right. And Alderman, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to pull the resolution for the Great Street planning grant. Third item down.
All right. Any other items, sir?
No, that's it.
All right. Okay. That we move on to the consent agenda. Let's see. Do I have a motion in a second for our first reading? We have a motion second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Do I have a motion and second for a second reading?
So moved.
Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All right, the motion passes. Will the city clerk please read the titles twice consecutively?
Approval of the appointment of Destin Engarten to serve on the police board. Approval of the appointment of Tim Anderson to serve on the civil service board. Approval of the aldermanic appointments to boards and commissions. Approval of a request for destruction of records. And approval of a special permit to allow the Recreation Division to launch rockets as part of the Mad Science Rocketry Camp at White Cliff Summer Park. An ordinance amending the Public Works fee schedule to account for costs incurred by the Crestwood Fire Department in performing inspections for fire protection and suppression within the city of Crestwood, Missouri. An ordinance amending the Union of Integrated Facilities Services, Inc. for HVC improvements at White Cliff Community Center and authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute the same on behalf of the city. I'll read the ordinances for a second time. An ordinance amending the Public Works fee schedule to account for costs incurred by the Crestwood Fire Department in performing inspections for fire protection and suppression within the city of Crestwood, Missouri. An ordinance amending the agreement with the Integrated Facilities Services, Inc. for HVC improvements at White Cliff Community Center and authorizing the mayor and city clerk to execute the same on behalf of the city.
Will the city clerk please take roll call?
Alderman Breeding?
Yes.
Alderman Duncan? Yes. Alderman Statter?
Yes.
Alderman Charbonneau?
Yes.
Alderman Maybe?
Yes.
Alderman Gall?
Yes.
Alderman Ivey? Yes. 7 ayes. The agenda has passed.
Thank you, city clerk. Now we will move on to items removed from the consent agenda, and we will start with the approval of the April 24th, 2018 regular meeting minutes. Alderman IUS, you request that be pulled.
Yeah, I just pulled it because I have a confusion here. On page 53, third paragraph, it says, commended Alderman Warnock and Alderman Kennedy. And maybe I'm wrong, but is it not Alderman Anderson?
What page 53 you said?
53, third paragraph. I thought it was Alderman Anderson and Kennedy. So I just saw that little mistake, I guess, if I'm not wrong. I mean, page 53.
Bear with me, sorry, I'm completely out of order. Shuffling earlier this evening.
Page 2 of the minute.
Last line.
Last line, yeah. I thought, yes, it wasn't Alderman Anderson and not Kennedy.
All right, so you want to make a motion to change that?
Yes, I mean, to make it correct, I guess. So I move that we change from Alderman Kennedy to Alderman Anderson.
All right. We'll get a second on the motion.
Second.
Second has been made to update the minutes to reflect the correct change to Alderman Anderson, as stated on page 53, page 2 of the minutes. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. All right. That carries. The minutes have been approved. Or, sorry, the motion has been approved. Now I need a motion to accept minutes. Do you have a comment? Nope. Alderman Gell, you have a comment?
Yeah. On the second paragraph under public comment there. I understand that the change has been made.
Correct.
But there's a there's a reference there to Exhibit B. That should be Exhibit A. But I understand that that has been made.
Correct.
City clerk can confirm that that change.
Wait, no, Exhibit A is on the front. Exhibit A is the PowerPoint presentation. There's 3 exhibits total. Exhibit B is that, and then isn't there an Exhibit C toward the end?
Okay, so.
But the deputy has reviewed and corrected the exhibit numbers.
Okay. So, Alderman Rendell, do you still wish to make a change, or do you believe it's been corrected according to the city clerk?
I accept the city clerk's statement that the changes have been made. Apparently, the change that was made was on page 56. And I assume then that would be a reference to Exhibit C instead of D.
Correct. That, on page 5 of the minutes. Your comments indeed are Exhibit C, correct?
Very good. Thank you. That's all I have.
No change at this time.
Not necessary because
because she'd already discovered it.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, Alderman Gell. Any additional comments on this minutes? If not, I'm going to ask for a motion to accept the minutes. And a motion by Alderman Maybe. Second. Alderman Ayuez. All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. All right, the ayes carried. The minutes have been approved. So now we will go to the acceptance of the sewer lateral fund status report. Alderman Ayuez, I believe you also pulled that.
Yes, a couple of questions about that. Number 4, it says the total number of repairs approved during each of the 3 preceding fiscal years and the average cost per repair. Unless I'm mistaken, I don't see that. Average cost per repair. And I was just curious to have that information. The second question I have is that I see a discrepancy between the application and repairs, and I understand that some applications have been not approved. Can someone educate me about the process of approving those applications? Because it's a lot of application coming and much less approved. How long does it take to go through an application, approve it or not? If you could answer those questions, please.
Yeah, Mr. Gillen, would you mind?
Sure. There's just a couple days of review time for the application, and typically it's the review of the receipts and making sure that they're within the allotted time frame, and then we'll have to read the notes and verify that it's for a defect to the lateral, and then at that time we'll contact our investigation contractor to go out and perform a cabling and a camera.
So do you review those applications, or is it someone in your team?
It's the code enforcement officer.
Okay. Is there a way to, I don't know, it's just, do you think 2 days it's a good use of the time of the code enforcer? When I see, for instance, 72 applications and 45 repairs, that means that you have around 30 applications that were not approved. Mm-hmm. And my question for you is that, can we improve the process maybe beforehand for the application, so your team members don't waste time to go for an application for 2 days that it's going to be rejected, and so you can focus more of the time to go out there and do code enforcement, stuff like this. I don't know. I'm just like, when I see at least 30 applications rejected, means that maybe we can improve the application, making sure that people, when they apply, they know what they're doing, and you're going to accept that. Otherwise, it's a waste of time for the applicant, it's a waste of time for your team as well, I guess. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
It does, and part of what we did with the revisions of the sewer lateral, it used to be over a 12-month period, and now we've made it over an 18-month period. Okay. There have been multiple times when residents will come in, and it would be over the 12-month period, but less than the 18-month period. So I think that will help. There are also times when there's a sale of a property and they'll send in the video, and they'll ask us to review it, and sometimes there's no defect with the lateral, and we'll just let them know.
Okay.
And then sometimes it's a minor defect, and if it's just a minor defect, we're not going to make a repair. So it's kind of tougher to address those in advance because it's not typically something that the resident is familiar with and can review it and understand what's minor and what is major.
Okay. And quick question for you, City Administrator. So I see that we have a balance of $254,000, but every year we have more money coming in. What do we do with this money? We just use that for repairs, that's it. So with that balance, or is it something that we can use for other projects?
So Crestwood, it appears at least, I haven't done a detailed analysis going back 10 years or so, but Crestwood thus far has not seen what other cities have seen, but I expect that we eventually will, which is that the number of repair requests that we receive and the average cost per repair is eventually going to increase. Now, the reason why you have any sort of savings is to help protect against, your rainy days, when you need those funds. I would expect at some point in the future, could be 3 years, could be 13 years, I don't know. But at some point in the future, we're going to see that trend where there is an increasing demand for this service and increasing costs. And we're going to have to approach a point where, for a couple of years, we may dip into those reserve funds. And obviously, if we see that trend continue year over year, then the board would have to consider whether or not we go to the voters and request them to increase the fee. The current statutory maximum is $50 per year. In order to provide additional funds to help deal with that increased demand. So you maintain that balance to guard against that day that I think will eventually come, given our status as an interring suburb where most of the homes are built with clay, sewer laterals, and things of that nature, which tend to have these sorts of issues. So that's really why we have it. And could you authorize us to spend to really go crazy and liberalize the sewer lateral policy and approve everything that came through? Yeah, you could approve a policy. I wouldn't recommend it, though, because it wouldn't be a very efficient use of those funds.
Thank you so much.
And you also had a question about the average cost. It wasn't calculated for you on there, but you can take the expenditures every single year and divide it by the number of repairs conducted. Yeah. And I can give you that result right now if you'd like. For fiscal 2015, I'm just rounding, the average cost of repair was $2,810. For 2016, the average cost per repair was $2,651, and for 2017, the average cost was $2,996.
Thank you so much.
That's it. Thank you so much. Alderman Miguel.
Just a point of information. I apologize for the interruption. Is there a motion we need to do anything with sewer lateral to accept it or no?
We just need to accept it, I believe. I don't think we're just accepting it, so just a simple voice vote.
No, I was going to comment on this particular.
Oh, I apologize. I thought you were jumping on the next item.
All right.
Okay.
Alderman Miguel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to point out that if you look at the revenues and expenditures, in 2017, it was pretty much right on the money. The expenditures equal the revenues. And if you recall, we did approve an improved or an enhanced sewer lateral policy at the last meeting, and I expect that we will see our cost increase. The subject was discussed at a previous Public Works meeting. The guess, if I remember correctly, was that our cost might increase 10% perhaps, 7 to 10%. So the annual costs have been trending up, and it appears that we will be digging into that surplus in the near future. And that is not a discretionary fund. Those monies cannot be used for anything else. And that's all I have on it, Your Honor.
Thank you, Alderman Miguel. I see no further lights. With that, I'll accept a motion and second to accept this
Move to accept.
Second.
There's been a motion by Alderman McGill, second by Alderman Maybe. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. This has been accepted, and we will move on to the next item, which was pulled by Alderman McGill. The resolution in support of the city's application for a Great Streets Planning Grant through the East-West Gateway Council of Governments. Alderman McGill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look at this request, and personally, I need something more tangible before I can approve even $63,000 for a plan, which, in my view, if it's something which addresses Watson Road, is something which will call for millions of dollars. I look at the picture on the brochure, and that's on page 63, and that is not a picture of reality. There's nowhere on Watson Road that I can visualize this picture here on the cover of the Great Streets East-West Gateway. Where I could envision something like this would be within the mall complex itself, where one would pull in, park, and then walk. Could walk the entire perimeter of the mall. But that's not what the plan is today for the redevelopment of the mall. So, to me, I just can't visualize, I can't picture this kind of scene up and down Watson Road. For something like this to happen on Watson Road, seems to me you'd have to start all over. So, anyway, that's the way I see this. This is not South Grand. It's not that kind of a road. And that's all I have, Your Honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman McGill. I just want to add a quick comment. I know that South Grand is referenced. We have some friends that live in that area, and actually family that live down that area. And that area has become vibrant again. And I think a lot of that can be attributed to something like this, to put together great minds and look in the area to reevaluate something that could be done in the future regarding planning. So I personally do support this application to see what would come of it. That's all the comments I have on this. Alderman Maybe.
For the city planner, I'm thinking back to last year when we approved this exact same resolution to go after the Great Streets Grant. We were the runner-up out of the dozens of applicants. Is that right?
Correct.
And we think we hopefully have, with another joint application with Sunset Hills, we're hoping we'd have hopefully a good shot to win it this year.
I believe so. Mr. Gill, myself, and Eric Sturman from Sunset Hills, the city manager, attended the East-West Gateway workshop yesterday and presented our idea to the East-West Gateway Selection Committee, and I think it was well received.
And is one of the benefits that if you are the beneficiary of this Great Streets Planning Grant, that once this plan is put in place, it's easier to procure state and federal grants?
They put you in a position to go after and obtain TIP and STP grants in the future.
Okay, and is this, again, we're trying to recollect from last year when all of this was discussed, that the planners, that whoever wins this planning grant for Great Streets, it's kind of the A-list of planners nationwide that work on these projects?
Absolutely, it is they make a special effort to bring in out-of-town consultants so that you don't necessarily have the same frame of thinking. And they actually went over that yesterday about why they do that, and they really go over, I guess the best way to classify it is grade A planning firms that are very expensive.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think Alderman Miguel's point is noted that, Watson Road kind of is what it is. It's hard sometimes to envision something different than what's there, but I don't know, the Great Streets has had some success in other places, and you put some of the best and most creative minds in the country on making some improvements. It may not look like South Grand, but I imagine there's a lot of areas of improvement that could be made, and the power of human imagination. We put a man on the moon. I'm confident Watson Road can be improved from 44 to Grant Road, so I'm in favor of this, and I hope the city gets it this year. That's all I've got.
Thank you, Alderman Maybe. Alderman Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that where I work at UMSL, it's not the most green space that you can imagine, but we have gotten several grants to make it walkable, and Natural Bridge Road has been one of the recipients of this grants to make the streets walkable. I think it would be great for Watson Road. It would be a draw for people much younger than me to come to the city and do things like that, and I would totally support it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Didn't St. Genevieve or something win this last year?
Kimmswick, Missouri won last year.
Okay. I think what this also does, I remember, of course, talking about it here, but I also remember all the local media that picked up on it. It shows that there's some momentum for that town, and so Watson Road, we got to do something, and if you were to win this, it would show a lot of momentum for our town, so I like it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Alderman Breeding. Any further discussion on the matter? If not, I look for a motion to support.
Mr. Chairman, real quick, one amendment to the end of the document. The date needs to be changed to 2018 from 2017, please.
The resolution?
Yes, sir.
Motion to make that amendment.
All right, Alderman Maybe is making a motion to amend the document to reflect the proper year. Seconded by Alderman Satter. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. All right, the amendment has been accepted. Now we'll move back to the resolution. Can I get a resolution number?
1803.
1803. Let's do a voice vote, or excuse me, let's do a roll call vote on that.
You need a motion and a second?
Can I get a motion and a second for a roll call vote?
So moved.
Second, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, the ayes have it. City Clerk, please call roll.
Alderman Miguel?
Yes.
Alderman Satter?
Yes.
Alderman Duncan?
Yes.
Alderman Ayuas?
Yes.
Alderman Maybe?
Yes.
Alderman Charbonneau?
Yes.
Alderman Breeding?
Yes.
7 ayes. Resolution 1803 has passed.
Thank you very much, City Clerk. All right, we will move on from items removed from the consent agenda to new business. I see that we have one item because the prior item was moved. That is discussion of first aid candidate filings.
This item was requested by Alderman Maybe as an introduction to bills and future issues at a previous meeting.
Alderman Maybe, you have the floor, sir.
In recognition of the hour and the fact we've got a closed meeting after this meeting, I do want to talk about this, but I would move that we postpone it to old business at our next meeting.
May I interject for 1 second? Given my experience with elections, could we actually postpone it to first meeting in June, because I will have to be probably on the phone or miss next meeting.
Oh, and you'd like to talk about, okay. I will withdraw the motion and remake it to postpone to old business at the first meeting in June.
I'll second that.
Okay, motion's been made by Alderman Maybe and seconded by Alderman Satter. Any discussion on the item? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The discussion has been postponed to first meeting in June. All right, introduction of bill for future issues. Seeing none, or I'm sorry.
In the abundance of formality, if we could bring up the ordinance next meeting on the home moving.
Alderman, you have the floor for a discussion of the future issue. Go ahead, proceed.
I was going to request that the ordinance be brought to us on the amendment of the fees for moving structures in the city.
All right.
The one we talked about extensively earlier during the appeal.
Okay. So, city minister is doing that. All right. Any other comment, Alderman Rady? I'm sorry.
No. Say that next time.
Any other alderman have a future issue? Seeing none, I'm going to, before we go to adjournment, I actually need to ask for closed session, but I do ask that whenever the motion is made, that we maybe have a 5-minute recess before we move to closed session. City Clerk, would you please read the notice for closed session?
The Board of Aldermen is scheduled to meet this evening in closed session immediately following this meeting in order to discuss matters in accordance with Missouri Revised State Statute 610.0211 and 2. In order to adjourn to closed session, there needs to be a motion, a second, and a roll call vote.
All right, I'll ask for a motion and a second to adjourn closed session.
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Alderman Duncan and a second by Alderman Maybe. City Clerk, would you please do rolls?
Alderman Reed.
Yes.
Alderman Duncan.
Yes.
Alderman Stafford. Yes. Alderman Charbonneau.
Yes.
Alderman Maybe.
Yes.
Alderman McGowan.
Yes.
Alderman Ayers. 7 ayes. You are now adjourned to closed session after the 5-minute break.
Thank you, City Clerk, and thank you all who stuck it out.
Yeah, I listened to a few of the online